Fear, it's something we all face, but rarely talk about openly. It's that knot in your stomach before a big presentation, the hesitation before taking a risk, or the quiet dread of the unknown. Fear can stop us in our tracks, making us feel powerless and stuck. But what if I told you that fear isn't the enemy? What if fear is actually an invitation, a challenge to grow, to become stronger, and to discover just how resilient you truly are? This is where Stoicism comes in. Over 2,000 years ago, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. These words aren't just ancient wisdom, they're a blueprint for how to face fear head-on and reclaim control over your life. Stoicism isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending fear doesn't exist. It's about understanding fear, mastering it, and using it as fuel to become the best version of yourself. In this video, we're diving into 23 powerful Stoic lessons designed to help you conquer your biggest fears. These aren't just theoretical ideas, they're practical tools you can use in your everyday life, whether you're dealing with anxiety, uncertainty, or the fear of failure. Each lesson is rooted in timeless Stoic principles, but tailored to the challenges we face today. By the end of this journey, you'll not only understand fear differently, you'll see it as an opportunity to grow, to take action, and to live with courage. So, are you ready to transform fear from a roadblock into a stepping stone? Let's begin. Fear has a way of creeping into our lives when we fixate on outcomes beyond our reach. The Stoics understood this deeply, and their philosophy offers a simple yet profound tool for conquering fear: the dichotomy of control. This idea, central to Stoicism, divides life into two categories: what's within our control and what isn't. As Epictetus famously said, some things are within our power while others are not. Our thoughts, actions, and choices fall under our control. External events, other people's opinions, and even the outcomes of our efforts, those are not. When we focus on what we can't control, fear thrives. It's like trying to steer a ship in a storm while staring at the waves instead of holding the wheel. But when we shift our attention to what we can control, our own actions, attitudes, and responses, we regain a sense of power. Take the example of someone terrified of public speaking. Instead of worrying about how the audience will react, they can focus on preparing thoroughly, practicing their delivery, and staying present in the moment. By redirecting their energy inward, they transform fear into confidence. This isn't about ignoring the external world or pretending challenges don't exist. It's about recognizing where your influence truly lies. So, think about your own fears for a moment. What parts of them are within your control? Maybe it's the effort you put into a project, the way you respond to criticism, or the mindset you choose to adopt. By anchoring yourself in what you can control, you not only reduce fear but also cultivate resilience and clarity. After all, as the Stoics remind us, true freedom comes from mastering what's within your grasp. How often does fear arise from imagining the future? Most of our anxieties stem not from what's happening right now, but from what we think might happen. The Stoics understood this deeply, urging us to embrace the present moment as the only time we truly have control over. Seneca, one of the great Stoic philosophers, wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." He reminded us that the future is uncertain, and worrying about it only robs us of the peace we could find in the here and now. Think about it. How many times has your mind spiraled into dread over a scenario that never actually came to pass? The Stoics believed that by grounding ourselves in the present, we could free ourselves from the weight of those imagined fears. Mindfulness, a concept often associated with modern psychology, has its roots in this ancient wisdom. It's about training your mind to focus on what's directly in front of you, rather than getting lost in the endless what-ifs. Take, for example, a professional athlete stepping onto the field. Their fear of failure or injury might loom large, but the ones who excel are those who stay locked into the present, focusing on their breath, their technique, and the immediate task at hand. By doing so, they quiet the noise of future uncertainties and perform at their best. This isn't just about sports, it's a strategy for life. So, how can you practice this? Start small. When you feel fear creeping in, pause and take a deep breath. Notice what's around you, the sounds, the sensations, the details of the moment. Ask yourself, what's happening right now? What can I control in this very instant? By bringing your attention back to the present, you chip away at the power of those future-focused fears. The Stoics didn't just preach this idea, they lived it, and you can too. What if I told you that fear isn't your enemy, but one of your greatest teachers? This is the heart of Lesson 3, Reframe fear as an opportunity. The Stoics believed that fear, like any challenge, is not something to run from, it's something to lean into. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The obstacle is the way." What he meant was that the very thing we fear, the obstacle standing in our path, can become the stepping stone to our growth. It's not about avoiding fear, it's about transforming it. Think about it this way: fear is often a signal. It's your mind's way of telling you that something matters. The Stoics saw fear as a mirror reflecting what we value most. If you're afraid of failure, it's because you care about success. If you're afraid of rejection, it's because you value connection. Fear isn't the problem, it's how we respond to it that defines us. The Stoics taught us to meet fear with curiosity, to ask, what can I learn from this? How can this make me stronger? Take the story of Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher who was born into slavery. His life was filled with uncertainty, hardship, and fear. But instead of letting those fears consume him, he used them as fuel. He saw every challenge as an opportunity to practice virtue, to cultivate resilience, and to grow. His teachings remind us that fear doesn't have to paralyze us, it can propel us forward. So, here's a question for you. What if your biggest fear isn't a wall but a door? What if it's not holding you back but inviting you to step into a stronger, more capable version of yourself? The next time you feel that familiar knot of fear, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what is this fear trying to teach me? How can I use this moment to grow? Fear doesn't have to be the enemy. It can be the mentor you never knew you needed. Fear can feel overwhelming, like a storm cloud hovering over every decision. But what if I told you there's a way to shrink that cloud before it even forms? This is where Stoicism introduces a powerful tool called premeditatio malorum, or negative visualization. It's not about pessimism or dwelling on the worst, it's about preparation. The idea is simple yet profound. By imagining the worst-case scenarios, we strip fear of its power to surprise or paralyze us. Seneca, one of Stoicism's greatest thinkers, put it this way: what is quite unlooked for is more crushing in its effect, and unexpectedness adds to the weight of a disaster. This is a reason for ensuring that nothing ever takes us by surprise. In other words, by mentally rehearsing challenges, we're not caught off guard when life throws them our way. We're ready, resilient, and far less likely to be overwhelmed. Let's bring this to life with an example. Imagine someone terrified of public speaking. They've been asked to give a presentation at work, and the fear of stumbling over words or forgetting their points keeps them up at night. Instead of avoiding the fear, they practice negative visualization. They sit down and think through every possible worst-case scenario. What if I blank out? What if the audience laughs at me? What if I fail completely? By facing these fears head-on, they realize something crucial. Even if the worst happens, it's not the end of the world. They'll recover. The audience might not even notice. And with that realization, the fear loses its grip. They walk into the presentation not as a victim of anxiety, but as someone prepared for whatever comes their way. Now it's your turn. Think about something that's been weighing on you, a fear, a challenge, or an upcoming event that feels daunting. Take a few moments to visualize the worst-case scenario. What's the absolute worst that could happen? And once you've faced it, ask yourself, could I handle it? The answer is almost always yes. By practicing negative visualization, you're not just preparing for the worst, you're building the mental strength to face it with calm and clarity. Fear thrives in the unknown, but when you shine a light on it, it starts to shrink. Here's the next part of the script based on your outline segment. Resilience isn't just about bouncing back, it's about standing firm, even when life feels like it's pulling the ground out from under you. For the Stoics, resilience was more than a trait. It was a virtue, a way of life. They believed that true strength comes not from avoiding difficulty, but from facing it head-on and growing through the experience. It's about cultivating an inner fortress that no external storm can shake. Epictetus, one of Stoicism's most influential teachers, put it simply, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. He taught that hardships are not obstacles to a good life, but opportunities to practice virtue. When we endure challenges without losing our composure, we build mental toughness. We learn to see adversity not as a threat, but as a teacher. Take the story of James Stockdale, a U.S. Navy pilot who was shot down during the Vietnam War and held as a prisoner for over 7 years. In that unimaginable situation, Stockdale leaned on Stoic principles to survive. He focused on what he could control, his attitude, his resilience, and let go of what he couldn't. Instead of succumbing to despair, he used his suffering as a tool to strengthen his mind. Stockdale's story is a testament to the power of Stoic resilience, showing us that even in the darkest moments, we can find the strength to endure. So, what about you? Think about the challenges you've faced or the fears you're grappling with right now. How do you respond when life gets tough? Do you crumble under pressure, or do you rise to the occasion? The Stoics remind us that resilience isn't something we're born with, it's something we build, one challenge at a time. Every hardship you face is a chance to grow stronger, to prove to yourself just how much you can endure. The next time you feel overwhelmed, remember this: adversity isn't your enemy, it's your training ground, and with each trial, you're not just surviving, you're becoming more resilient, more unshakable, more stoic. Why do we fear failure? At its core, it's often because we tie our self-worth, happiness, and identity to external outcomes, whether it's acing a project, winning someone's approval, or achieving a specific goal. But Stoicism offers a radically different perspective. The Stoics teach us that true peace comes not from controlling outcomes, but from detaching ourselves from them. Marcus Aurelius, one of history's greatest Stoic thinkers, put it this way: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Think about it for a moment. When you attach your happiness to something outside your control, like the results of a test, the opinion of others, or even the success of a business venture, you're essentially handing over your emotional well-being to forces you can't dictate. But what if, instead of fearing failure, you could approach it with indifference? Not indifference in the sense of not caring, but in the sense of accepting that outcomes are often beyond your control. What matters most is your effort, your intentions, and your ability to adapt, not the result itself. Consider the example of an athlete who trains for years only to lose a crucial match. If they've tied their entire identity to winning, the loss can feel devastating. But if they've practiced detachment, they can appreciate the effort they put in, the lessons they've learned, and the growth they've experienced, regardless of the final score. This shift in mindset doesn't diminish their ambition, it liberates them from the fear of failure, allowing them to perform with clarity and focus. So, what might you gain from detaching from external outcomes? Perhaps it's freedom from anxiety, a deeper sense of self-worth, or the ability to face challenges with resilience. Take a moment to reflect. What would it feel like to let go of the need for a specific result and instead focus on the process itself? How might that change the way you approach your goals, your relationships, or even your fears? Detachment isn't about giving up. It's about finding strength in what you can control and peace in what you can't. Life is a constant flow, a river that never stops moving. And yet, so much of our fear comes from trying to hold onto things that are inherently temporary: relationships, possessions, even our own sense of control. The Stoics teach us to embrace this truth through a powerful principle called amor fati, or the love of fate. It's not about resigning yourself to life's changes, but about actively accepting them, even welcoming them. When you stop resisting the natural ebb and flow of existence, you free yourself from the grip of fear. Seneca once wrote, "All things human are short-lived and perishable." Think about that for a moment. Everything you cherish, everything you fear losing, is fleeting by nature. The job you're worried about losing, the relationship you're afraid might end, even the life you're living, it's all temporary. And while that might sound unsettling at first, there's incredible freedom in this realization. When you accept impermanence, you stop clinging so tightly to what you can't control. Instead, you learn to appreciate what you have while it's here, without letting the fear of losing it consume you. Take the story of a modern entrepreneur who built a successful business only to see it collapse during an economic downturn. At first, the fear of failure was paralyzing, the fear of losing everything he'd worked for. But over time, he began to see the collapse not as a disaster, but as an opportunity. He realized that the business, like all things, was temporary, and by accepting that truth, he found the courage to start again, this time with a deeper understanding of resilience and adaptability. His fear of the unknown didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled him. So, what about you? What fears are you holding onto because they feel permanent, even though they're not? The Stoic practice of amor fati invites you to look at those fears differently. Instead of resisting change, ask yourself, what if I embraced it? What if I saw every ending as a new beginning, every loss as a chance to grow? When you shift your perspective in this way, the unknown becomes less frightening. It becomes a space of possibility, a reminder that life's impermanence is what makes it so precious. Self-discipline is one of the most powerful tools we have for conquering fear. It's not about denying yourself pleasure or living a rigid life. It's about building the inner strength to face challenges head-on. The Stoics believed that discipline is the bridge between where we are and where we want to be, especially when fear stands in the way. By mastering our desires and impulses, we create a sense of control that makes fear less intimidating. Epictetus, one of the great Stoic teachers, put it simply, "No man is free who is not master of himself." He taught that true freedom comes from self-control, not from external circumstances. When we discipline our thoughts and actions, we stop being slaves to fear. Instead, we become architects of our own courage. Think about it, fear often thrives in chaos, in the moments when we feel unprepared or overwhelmed. But discipline brings order. It gives us a plan, a rhythm, and the confidence to follow through. Take, for example, the story of a young athlete who struggled with performance anxiety. Every time she stepped onto the track, fear of failure paralyzed her. Instead of avoiding the problem, she committed to a disciplined routine, daily visualization, consistent training, and small, incremental goals. Over time, her confidence grew. The fear didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled her. Her disciplined approach gave her the tools to move forward, even when doubt crept in. Now consider this, where in your life could discipline help you face a fear? Maybe it's procrastination, a habit you've been meaning to break, or a goal you've been too afraid to pursue. Start small. Identify one area where a bit more self-control could make a difference and commit to it. The Stoics remind us that discipline isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Every step you take builds your resilience, and every act of self-mastery chips away at fear's power. Have you ever wondered how something as simple as gratitude could be a powerful weapon against fear? The Stoics believed that fear often stems from focusing on what we lack, what we don't have, what we might lose, or what we think we need. But gratitude flips the script. It shifts our attention to what we already possess, grounding us in the present moment and reminding us of the abundance that surrounds us. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." This simple practice of acknowledging the good in our lives can act as an anchor, steadying us when fear tries to pull us under. Consider the story of a young woman who faced a life-altering health diagnosis. At first, fear consumed her, fear of the unknown, fear of loss, fear of failure. But instead of letting it paralyze her, she began a daily practice of gratitude. Each morning, she wrote down 3 things she was thankful for, no matter how small. Over time, this habit transformed her mindset. She stopped focusing on what she might lose and started appreciating what she still had: her family, her resilience, and even the beauty of a sunrise. Gratitude didn't erase her fear, but it gave her the strength to face it with courage. So, what about you? What are 3 things you're grateful for today? Take a moment to reflect. Maybe it's the support of a loved one, the comfort of a warm meal, or even the opportunity to learn and grow through challenges. Gratitude isn't about ignoring fear, it's about choosing to see the light even when shadows loom. By practicing gratitude, we don't just survive fear, we rise above it, one thankful thought at a time. Fear is a natural part of being human. It's not something to be ashamed of or to run from. In fact, the Stoics teach us that understanding fear is the first step toward mastering it. Seneca, one of the great Stoic philosophers, once said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." This reminds us that fear often grows in the shadows of our minds, fueled by assumptions and worst-case scenarios that may never come to pass. Instead of avoiding fear, the Stoic approach is to face it head-on, to examine it, and to see it for what it truly is. Imagine someone who's terrified of public speaking. The thought of standing in front of a crowd makes their heart race and their palms sweat. But when they take a moment to analyze their fear, they realize it's not the act of speaking that terrifies them, it's the fear of judgment, of being seen as inadequate. By breaking it down, they can address the root cause rather than letting the fear control them. This is the power of understanding. When you shine a light on fear, it loses its hold over you. So, what about your fears? What's really driving them? Is it the fear of failure, rejection, or the unknown? Take a moment to reflect on this. By exploring the source of your fears, you can begin to dismantle them piece by piece. The Stoics believed that fear, when understood, becomes a tool for growth rather than an obstacle. It's not about erasing fear entirely, it's about seeing it clearly so you can move forward with courage and clarity. The Stoics placed immense importance on mental fortitude, viewing it as the cornerstone of a resilient and fearless life. They believed that while external circumstances are often beyond our control, our mindset, how we perceive and respond to those circumstances, is entirely within our power. This is where true strength lies. Think of your mind as a fortress. The stronger it is, the less fear can penetrate its walls. Epictetus, one of the great Stoic philosophers, put it simply, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." This idea is profound because it shifts the focus from the external world to our internal world. Fear, in essence, is not the event itself, but our interpretation of it. When we change the way we see a situation, we change the way we feel about it. For example, imagine someone who's terrified of public speaking. They might see it as a threat, a moment where they could embarrass themselves. But what if they reframed it as an opportunity to share their ideas, to connect with others, or to grow their confidence? That shift in perception transforms fear into fuel. Take the story of Malala Yousafzai, a modern example of someone who turned fear into courage through mindset. Facing the threat of violence for advocating girls' education, she could have let fear paralyze her. Instead, she chose to see her fear as a signal of what mattered most: her values and her mission. Her mental fortitude allowed her to stand firm, not just for herself, but for millions of others. So, how can you apply this to your own life? Start by examining the fears that hold you back. Ask yourself, what story am I telling myself about this fear? Is it the only way to see it? Often, we're stuck in a single narrative, but the truth is, there are countless ways to interpret any situation. By consciously reframing your thoughts, you can begin to dismantle the power fear holds over you. It's not about eliminating fear entirely, that's impossible. It's about building a mindset strong enough to face it head-on, to see it not as an obstacle but as a teacher. What's one fear you can start reframing today? Does the relentless chase for perfection actually fuel your fears? It's a question worth asking because, for many of us, the pressure to be flawless can feel like an invisible weight, holding us back from taking risks or even pursuing our goals. The Stoics, however, offer a refreshing perspective. Imperfection isn't something to fear, it's something to embrace. Marcus Aurelius, one of the great Stoic philosophers, once wrote, "You don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you." In other words, progress, not perfection, is what truly matters. Think about it. How often do we stall or avoid taking action because we're worried about getting it wrong? Stoicism teaches us to focus on what's within our control: our effort, our attitude, and our willingness to learn, rather than obsessing over outcomes we can't fully dictate. Perfectionism, at its core, is often a fear of failure disguised as a desire for excellence. But here's the truth: failure isn't the opposite of success, it's a stepping stone toward it. Consider the story of Thomas Edison, who famously said, "I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Imagine if he had let the fear of imperfection stop him. His willingness to embrace mistakes and learn from them led to one of the most transformative inventions in history. The Stoics would applaud this mindset. It's not about being perfect, it's about being persistent, adaptable, and resilient. So take a moment to reflect. Where in your life are you holding yourself to impossible standards? What fears are you nurturing by demanding perfection from yourself? The Stoic path invites you to let go of that burden. Progress, no matter how small, is still progress. And sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is to accept your flaws and move forward anyway. What might you achieve if you stopped waiting for perfect conditions and simply started where you are? Stoic philosophy teaches us that virtue stands above all else. It's the highest good, the ultimate measure of a life well lived. Unlike external outcomes, which are often beyond our control, virtue is something we can cultivate within ourselves, no matter the circumstances. When we shift our focus from chasing results to embodying principles like courage, wisdom, justice, and self-discipline, something remarkable happens. The fear of failure begins to lose its grip. Why? Because virtue isn't tied to success or failure. It's about who we are and how we act regardless of the outcome. Epictetus, one of the great Stoic thinkers, put it this way: "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." In other words, decide what kind of person you want to be, someone guided by integrity, kindness, and strength, and let those principles steer your actions. When you live in alignment with your values, you'll find that the opinions of others, the fear of rejection, or even the sting of failure no longer hold the same power over you. Consider the story of a young entrepreneur who poured years into building a business, only to see it collapse during an economic downturn. At first, the failure felt devastating. But instead of letting fear and shame take over, she chose to act with virtue. She took responsibility, treated her employees with fairness even as she let them go, and used the experience to grow wiser and more resilient. In the end, she didn't measure her worth by the success or failure of the business, but by the courage and integrity she showed in the face of adversity. What does virtue mean to you? Is it standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable? Is it showing kindness when others are indifferent? The beauty of Stoic virtue is that it's deeply personal. It's about aligning your actions with what matters most to you. When you make virtue your compass, fear becomes just another obstacle to navigate, not something to avoid. So take a moment to reflect. How can you focus more on who you're becoming rather than what you're achieving? The answer might just free you from the grip of fear and guide you toward a life of deeper meaning. One of the most powerful yet overlooked tools Stoicism offers is the practice of voluntary discomfort. At first glance, it might sound counterintuitive. Why would anyone choose to endure hardship when life already throws enough challenges our way? But this is precisely where the Stoics saw an opportunity for growth. They believed that by willingly embracing small, manageable discomforts, we could train ourselves to face life's larger fears with unshakable calm. Take, for example, the Stoic practice of fasting or sleeping on a harder surface. These weren't acts of self-punishment but deliberate exercises in building resilience. By experiencing hunger or discomfort in a controlled way, they reminded themselves that they could endure far more than they thought possible. Seneca, one of Stoicism's greatest thinkers, put it this way: "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" In other words, by facing small hardships voluntarily, we strip away the power of fear itself. Consider the story of a modern-day runner who decided to train for a marathon despite her intense fear of failure. Instead of jumping straight into the race, she started small, running in the rain, waking up early to train, or pushing herself to run an extra mile when it felt uncomfortable. Over time, these small acts of voluntary discomfort built her confidence. By the time race day arrived, the fear of failure no longer paralyzed her. She had already proven to herself that she could endure discomfort, and that realization gave her the strength to cross the finish line. So, what's one small act of discomfort you can embrace today? Maybe it's taking a cold shower, fasting for a few hours, or simply sitting with an uncomfortable emotion instead of distracting yourself. The goal isn't to make your life harder, it's to remind yourself that you are stronger than your fears. When you willingly step into discomfort, even in the smallest ways, you're not just building resilience. You're reclaiming your power over fear itself. What if failure is just information? What if every setback, every mistake, is not a dead end but a signpost pointing you toward growth? The Stoics believed this deeply. Marcus Aurelius, one of history's most renowned Stoic philosophers, once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." In other words, the obstacles we face, our failures, are not just things to endure, they're opportunities to learn, adapt, and move forward. Think about it. When something doesn't go as planned, it's easy to label it as failure and feel defeated. But the Stoics would argue that this is where the real work begins. Failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of the process. It's feedback. It's the universe saying, "Here's what needs adjusting." And when you start to see it that way, fear of failure loses its grip on you. You stop dreading it and start learning from it. Take the story of Thomas Edison, for example. He famously failed thousands of times while inventing the light bulb. But he didn't see those attempts as failures. Instead, he called them steps on the path to success. Each failure taught him something new, something he could use to improve. That's the Stoic mindset in action, treating failure not as a personal flaw but as a tool for growth. Now, think about your own life. Can you recall a time when something didn't go as planned, but later you realized it led to something better? Maybe a job you didn't get pushed you toward a career you love, or a relationship that ended opened the door to a healthier, happier connection. Those moments aren't just random, they're feedback. They're showing you where to adjust, where to grow, and where to focus your energy. So the next time you face a setback, ask yourself, what is this trying to teach me? How can I use this experience to move forward? When you start to see failure as feedback, you'll find that fear has less power over you. Instead of holding you back, those so-called failures become stepping stones on your path to becoming stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Picture this: you're in the middle of a chaotic situation and fear starts to creep in. Your heart races, your mind spirals, and every instinct tells you to react immediately. But what if, instead of giving in to that impulse, you could pause, breathe, and respond with clarity? This is the power of equanimity, a cornerstone of Stoic philosophy. Equanimity is the ability to remain calm and balanced, no matter what storms life throws your way. It's not about suppressing emotions or pretending fear doesn't exist. It's about choosing how you respond to those emotions rather than letting them control you. The Stoics believed that fear often arises from our inability to control external events. But what we can control is our reaction. Epictetus, one of the great Stoic teachers, put it simply: it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. When we cultivate equanimity, we create a buffer between the external chaos and our inner peace. This calmness allows us to see situations more clearly, make better decisions, and act with intention rather than impulse. Let's take a real-life example. Imagine you're at work and suddenly a major project falls apart. Deadlines are looming, tensions are high, and everyone around you is panicking. In that moment, you have a choice. You can join the frenzy, or you can pause, assess the situation, and take deliberate steps to address the problem. The person who chooses equanimity doesn't ignore the urgency. They simply don't let fear dictate their actions. They respond with focus, resourcefulness, and a clear mind. So how can you start practicing this? Begin by creating a habit of pausing. When fear or stress arises, take a moment to ground yourself, breathe deeply, observe your thoughts without judgment, and remind yourself that you have the power to choose your response. Over time, this small act of pausing can become a powerful tool for maintaining your inner peace, even in the face of fear. Equanimity isn't something you achieve overnight. It's a skill you build through consistent practice. And the more you practice, the more you'll find that fear loses its grip and calm confidence takes its place. How does fear shrink your perspective? It's a question worth sitting with for a moment. When we're gripped by fear, our world becomes small. It's as if we're staring through a keyhole, only able to see the immediate threat, the looming obstacle, or the worst-case scenario. But what if we could step back and widen the lens? The Stoics believed that fear often distorts our view, making mountains out of molehills and trapping us in a narrow, reactive mindset. Seneca, one of the great Stoic thinkers, once said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Think about that. Most of the fears we carry around, whether it's fear of failure, rejection, or the unknown, are products of our own minds, not the world itself. They're shadows we've given power to, not truths we're forced to live with. Take the story of Marcus, a young entrepreneur who was terrified of pitching his startup to investors. For weeks, he played out every possible disaster in his head: rejection, humiliation, even ridicule. But then he remembered a Stoic practice: zooming out. He asked himself, in the grand scheme of my life, how much will this moment matter? Suddenly, the fear lost its grip. He realized that even if the pitch went poorly, it wouldn't define him. It was just one moment in a much larger journey. By focusing on the bigger picture, Marcus found the courage to step forward, and ironically, his pitch went better than he ever expected. This is the power of perspective. When we step back and see our fears in the context of our entire life, they often shrink to a manageable size. The Stoics remind us that life is a mosaic made up of countless moments, some joyful, some painful, but all fleeting. So the next time fear tries to narrow your view, ask yourself, how does this fit into the bigger picture? Will this matter in a week, a year, or a decade? Sometimes just asking that question can change everything. Life is unpredictable, and that's exactly why the Stoics teach us to embrace uncertainty rather than fear it. At its core, this lesson is about shifting your perspective, recognizing that the unknown isn't something to resist but something to accept as a natural part of existence. When we try to control every outcome or cling to the illusion of certainty, we only amplify our anxiety. But when we learn to make peace with what we can't predict, we weaken fear's hold on us. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." These words remind us that while life's twists and turns are beyond our control, our response to them is entirely within our power. Consider the story of a musician who, after years of striving for a predictable career, suddenly found herself without a record deal or clear path forward. Instead of panicking, she chose to see this uncertainty as an opportunity to explore new creative directions. She began experimenting with different genres, collaborating with other artists, and even teaching music to others. What initially felt like a devastating setback became the catalyst for a richer, more fulfilling life. By embracing the unknown, she discovered a sense of freedom she'd never experienced before. Now take a moment to reflect on your own life. How do you respond when faced with ambiguity? Do you resist it, or do you allow yourself to lean into it? The Stoics believed that uncertainty isn't something to fear. It's a chance to grow, to adapt, and to find strength in the face of the unexpected. When you stop fighting the unpredictability of life, you open yourself up to new possibilities and a deeper sense of resilience. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself, am I harder on myself than I need to be? It's a question many of us avoid, yet it's one of the most important we can confront. Stoicism teaches us that true strength isn't about being harsh or unforgiving with ourselves. It's about practicing compassion, even when we feel we've fallen short. Epictetus, one of the great Stoic philosophers, once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." But what does that really mean? It's not about punishing yourself for mistakes or holding yourself to impossible standards. It's about mastering the art of self-kindness, of treating yourself with the same care and understanding you'd offer a close friend. Think about how you respond when someone you care about makes a mistake. Do you berate them, or do you offer support and encouragement? Now, ask yourself why it's so much harder to extend that same grace to yourself. Stoicism reminds us that self-compassion isn't a weakness, it's a vital tool for growth. When we forgive ourselves, we create space to learn, to improve, and to move forward without being weighed down by guilt or fear. Consider the story of a modern-day athlete who faced a crushing defeat. Instead of spiraling into self-doubt, she chose to speak to herself with kindness. She reminded herself that failure wasn't the end but a stepping stone. By practicing self-compassion, she found the courage to return to her sport stronger and more resilient than ever. Her story is a powerful reminder that how we talk to ourselves matters. The words we choose can either lift us up or keep us trapped in fear. So, the next time you find yourself in a moment of struggle, pause, take a deep breath. Ask yourself, what would I say to someone I love in this situation? then say those words to yourself. Speak with kindness, with patience, and with the understanding that you're human. Because the truth is, you deserve that same compassion not just from others but from yourself. And when you start to treat yourself with care, you'll find that fear loses its grip and you become stronger than you ever imagined. Fear is not an enemy to be avoided, it's a compass pointing directly toward your greatest opportunities for growth. The Stoics understood this deeply. They didn't see fear as something to suppress or run from. Instead, they saw it as a signal, a signpost that reveals where we need to act, where we need to stretch ourselves, and where we have the chance to become stronger. Seneca, one of the great Stoic philosophers, put it this way: "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." What he's saying is that fear often magnifies the obstacles in front of us, but when we move toward what scares us, we often find it's far less daunting than we imagined. Think about it. When you feel fear, it's usually because you're standing at the edge of something unfamiliar, something that challenges your comfort zone. That's where growth happens. For example, imagine someone who's terrified of public speaking but chooses to volunteer for a presentation at work. Their fear isn't a stop sign, it's a flashing arrow pointing toward an area where they can develop confidence and skill. By stepping into that fear, they don't just conquer it, they transform it into a tool for personal progress. Now, what about you? What fears are whispering or shouting at you right now? Maybe it's a fear of failure, rejection, or even success. The Stoics would tell you to lean into those fears, not as a punishment, but as a guide. Ask yourself, what is this fear trying to show me? What action is it nudging me to take? When you start to see fear as a compass rather than a barrier, it becomes less intimidating and more empowering. It's not about eliminating fear, it's about using it to navigate toward your potential. So, the next time you feel that familiar knot in your stomach, pause and ask, what is this fear pointing me toward? And then take the first step. Who helps you face your fears? This might seem like a simple question, but it's one that Stoicism takes very seriously. The ancient Stoics believed that while we must ultimately confront our fears ourselves, we don't have to do it alone. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most famous Stoic philosophers, once wrote, "What is not good for the swarm is not good for the bee." This idea of shared humanity reminds us that we're all connected, and leaning on others isn't a sign of weakness, it's a recognition of our interdependence. Think about it. When you're facing something daunting, who do you turn to? A friend, a family member, or maybe even a mentor. These relationships aren't just comforting, they're essential. They ground us, remind us of our strength, and help us see challenges from new perspectives. The Stoics understood that a supportive community can act as a mirror, reflecting back our courage when we feel like we've lost it. Take the story of a young woman named Clara, for example. She struggled with a crippling fear of public speaking, something that held her back in her career and personal life. For years, she tried to face it alone, but progress was slow. Then, she joined a local speaking group where she met people who had overcome similar fears. They encouraged her, shared their own stories, and even cheered her on during her first few presentations. With their support, Clara not only conquered her fear but went on to become a confident speaker who now helps others do the same. This is the power of community. It's not about relying on others to solve our problems for us. It's about creating a space where we can grow together. So take a moment to reflect. Who is in your support system? Who stands by you when you're feeling uncertain or afraid? And just as importantly, how can you be that person for someone else? Because in the end, the Stoic path isn't just about personal growth, it's about building a life where we lift each other up. One of the most powerful tools the Stoics left us is the practice of daily reflection. At its core, Stoic journaling isn't just about writing down your thoughts, it's about self-examination. a deliberate act of looking inward to understand your emotions, actions, and fears. By taking time each day to reflect, you create space to process what's happening in your life, untangle your worries, and reduce the grip of fear. As Seneca once wrote, "When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by." This simple yet profound habit allows you to confront your fears head-on, rather than letting them linger in the shadows of your mind. Think about it. When you write down your fears, they lose some of their power. They become tangible, something you can examine and dissect. For instance, imagine someone who is terrified of public speaking. Each night, they sit down with their journal and reflect on their day. They write about the anxiety they felt before giving a presentation, how their body reacted, and what thoughts raced through their mind. Over time, they begin to notice patterns. Maybe their fear stems from a fear of judgment or a past embarrassing moment. By identifying these patterns, they can start to challenge and reframe those thoughts, gradually reducing the fear's hold on them. This practice isn't just theoretical, it's practical and accessible to anyone. All you need is a notebook and a few quiet moments each day. Start by asking yourself simple questions. What did I fear today? How did I respond to that fear? What could I do differently tomorrow? The goal isn't to judge yourself, but to observe, learn, and grow. By making reflection a daily habit, you'll find that fear becomes less overwhelming, and you'll gain clarity and confidence in facing life's challenges. So why not give it a try tonight? Take just 5 minutes to sit with your thoughts, pick up a pen, and start writing. You might be surprised at how transformative this small act can be. Fear has a way of shrinking when you confront the reality that life is finite. This is the essence of Memento Mori, a Latin phrase meaning, "Remember you must die." It's not about dwelling on the morbid or surrendering to despair. Instead, it's a powerful reminder to live with intention, to prioritize what truly matters, and to let go of the trivial fears that often hold us back. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, once wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." These words cut to the heart of it. When you truly grasp the fragility of life, the small fears, what others think, the risk of failure, the discomfort of stepping outside your comfort zone, start to lose their grip. Consider the story of a modern-day entrepreneur who, after being diagnosed with a serious illness, decided to embrace his mortality. Instead of retreating in fear, he used it as a catalyst to pursue his dreams with relentless focus. He started a business he'd always dreamed of, reconnected with estranged loved ones, and stopped wasting time on things that didn't align with his values. His awareness of death didn't paralyze him, it liberated him. It gave him the courage to act boldly, to live authentically, and to let go of the anxieties that once held him back. So, what would change for you if you lived with this kind of awareness? If you knew your time was finite, would you still let fear dictate your choices? Would you still hesitate to take risks, to speak your truth, or to chase the life you truly want? The Stoics believed that remembering your mortality isn't about fear, it's about freedom. It's about stripping away the layers of hesitation and doubt to reveal the core of who you are and what you're capable of. When you live with the knowledge that time is limited, fear no longer feels like an obstacle. It becomes a compass guiding you toward what truly matters. Now that we've journeyed through these 23 Stoic lessons, it's clear that conquering fear isn't about eliminating it entirely. It's about mastering how we respond to it. Each lesson builds on the next, forming a powerful toolkit to help you face life's uncertainties with courage and clarity. From understanding what's within your control to embracing discomfort as a path to growth, these principles remind us that fear loses its grip when we choose to act with intention and wisdom. Epictetus once said, "Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." It's not that we don't feel afraid, but that we don't allow fear to control us. This is the essence of what we've explored together. Fear is a natural part of being human, but it doesn't have to define us. By practicing these lessons, whether it's reframing challenges, focusing on the present moment, or cultivating gratitude, you can transform fear into an opportunity for growth. The beauty of Stoicism is that it's not just a philosophy to study, it's a way of life to live. These lessons aren't meant to be memorized and set aside, they're tools to be used daily, in moments big and small. Start small. Maybe today you'll pause and ask yourself, is this within my control? Or tomorrow you'll choose to face a fear head-on, knowing that discomfort is often the gateway to strength. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. The journey to conquering fear is ongoing, but every step you take brings you closer to the person you're capable of becoming. If these lessons resonated with you, I'd love to hear how you're applying them in your own life. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're ready for more Stoic wisdom, consider subscribing to this channel. Together, let's continue building lives of courage, resilience, and purpose. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Here's to facing fear, one lesson at a time.